Welcome back to Singapore Property Talk Law. Today we are diving deep into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz,
Oh, yeah.
decoupling.
It's a hot one.
It really is, and we have the perfect person to help us break it all down.
Absolutely.
Serene, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Serene, for our listeners who might be, hearing this term for the first time,
Yeah.
what exactly is decoupling when we talk about it in the context of Singapore property?
Okay, well, in the simplest terms, it's a way for some couples to kind of restructure how they own their property.
Okay.
And, often it's to avoid this big tax, that additional buyer's stamp duty.
The ABSD.
Yeah, exactly, that ABSD.
Right, right. And that ABSD can really throw a wrench in the plans for couples
Oh, absolutely.
who are maybe looking at buying a second property, whether it's for investment or they're growing their family.
Yeah, definitely.
So imagine you're in this situation, right? You're thinking about decoupling, maybe you heard it from a friend or read something online, and you think, hey, this might be a way to save a lot of money. But before you make that leap,
Yeah.
let's explore the WHY, the HRW, and the potential TRPS that come with this whole decoupling thing. So, Serene, let's start with that ABSD beast.
Oh, yeah.
How does decoupling actually help couples, sidestep this hefty tax?
Okay. Well, ABSD rates are pretty steep, to be honest. For Singapore citizens, it starts at 17% for that second property.
Wow.
And it can even be higher for permanent residents. So let's just take an example. Like a couple is looking at this $1 million condo
Yep.
as their second property.
Yeah.
If they just buy it together, like they already own a property and they buy this one together, they're looking at $170,000 in ABSD.
Oof. That's a lot.
It is, right. But if they decouple, one of them basically becomes what we call a non-owner.
Okay.
And then they can buy that condo as if they're a first-timer. And that potentially saves them, well, a huge amount of money.
That's a pretty compelling reason, especially in Singapore, where, property prices are already so high.
Oh, yeah.
But as you said, there's more to this than just saving on taxes.
Oh, yeah.
So let's break down the HOW. How does this decoupling magic actually happen? What are the steps involved?
Okay. Well, essentially, one spouse transfers their share of the property to the other spouse.
Okay.
And this is usually done, like a sale. One buys out the other one's share.
Okay.
And, of course, you need all the legal paperwork and all that, just like any other property transaction.
So it's like a mini property sale.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
happening within the marriage.
Within the marriage, yeah.
Interesting. Now, I'm guessing this comes with its own set of costs.
Absolutely. There are legal fees for the conveyancing
Right.
and maybe even BSD, buyer stamp duty, depending on how they decide to structure the ownership.
You brought up ownership structure, and that's something we hear a lot. Can you break that down for us? Like, what are the common structures, and why might a couple choose one over the other?
Okay. So the two most common ones you'll hear about are 50-50, where both spouses own half.
Right.
And then there's the 991,
991. Okay.
where one spouse owns, well, the lion's share.
Right.
And this 991, that can be a strategic move to minimize that BSD, the buyer's stamp duty.
So it's like going for the ultimate tax efficiency.
Kind of, yeah.
But I imagine there's a catch, right? I mean, what are the downsides, the risks, especially if we're thinking long term?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely risks. Like, let's say, touch wood, things don't work out, they get a divorce.
Right.
That spouse with the 1% ownership,
Yeah.
they might be in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
So while it looks good for taxes, you really have to think carefully about those risks.
This is where things start to get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about saving some money up front.
Right.
It's about potential complications down the road.
Absolutely.
And it brings us to a really important point. What are some of the big things, the key factors that couples should really think about before they even consider this whole decoupling thing?
Okay, well, there are a bunch, and we can go through each one.
Okay.
But one that's really, really important is the Intestate Succession Act.
Okay.
And, this is what dictates what happens to your assets
Right.
if you pass away without a will.
Okay.
And this is especially important for decoupled couples, especially if they've gone for that 991 split.
Because if something were to happen to the spouse who owns that 99%,
Right.
and there's no will,
Exactly.
things might not go as planned.
Yeah, it could get messy.
And it could leave the surviving spouse or the children in a really tough spot.
Absolutely. That's why estate planning is so important.
So it's not just a financial transaction.
Right.
It's a decision with long-term consequences for the whole family.
Oh.
Are there other things couples should be considering in this context?
Oh, definitely. Lots more to think about. Yeah, so another big thing is protection,
Okay.
especially for the surviving family members.
Right.
A lot of times, one spouse will end up carrying the whole mortgage after
Oh,
decoupling.
right.
So, if something were to happen to that spouse,
Yeah.
the family could be in a really tough spot,
Yeah.
especially if they haven't sorted out their estate planning.
Yeah, they could be left with a property they can't really afford and
Exact.
potentially lose their home.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
It really is. It's a reminder that decoupling isn't just about the here and now.
Right.
It's about protecting the future.
Thinking long term. Yeah.
And speaking of long term, what about the D word? Divorce. I mean, nobody wants to think about it, but
No.
it's a reality,
Yeah, it happens.
and it can have a big impact on a decoupling arrangement.
Oh, absolutely. Couples might be happy now, but things change.
Right.
And divorce can get really messy, especially when you're talking about property, which is a big asset.
Yeah.
And that 991 split, even though it might look good for taxes,
Yeah.
it can become a real problem during a divorce.
Right, because even though legally,
Yeah.
one spouse owns 99%,
Right.
the court might not see it that way when they're dividing assets.
Exactly. They'll look at contributions to the marriage,
Mhm.
the kids' well-being, all sorts of things.
So having a prenup or a postnup
Yeah, that's a good idea.
can really help protect everyone.
Absolutely, like a safety net.
Yeah, even within a marriage.
Right.
Okay, so it's clear. Decoupling means thinking about a lot of different things.
Oh, yeah.
Life changes, all that. But let's not forget the financial nitty-gritty,
Right.
CPF and home loans.
Yeah.
How does decoupling affect those?
Okay, so let's say a couple use their CPF for the property,
Okay.
and then they decide to decouple.
Right.
Well, the spouse who's transferring their ownership,
Yeah.
they might have to put back the CPF money they used,
Oh, wow.
plus the interest that it earned.
So that could be a lot of money,
Yeah, it can be a big chunk of change.
something people might not think about right away.
No, they get focused on the ABSD savings and forget about those other costs.
Right, right. What about the home loan itself? Does decoupling mess that up?
Well, the spouse who's getting the property,
Mm-hmm.
they might need to refinance the mortgage under their own name.
Okay.
And that's not always so easy. It
Okay.
depends on their income, their credit score,
Yeah.
the loan-to-value ratios, all that stuff.
So they might not get the same loan amount,
Exactly.
which could throw off their whole financial plan.
Absolutely. It's like a chain reaction,
Yeah, it's a financial domino effect.
Right. One thing leads to another.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
The why, the how, the potential problems.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to touch on something that comes up a lot. Gifting a property to children
Oh, yeah.
as an alternative to decoupling.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, gifting might seem simple on the surface, but it's got its own set of complications.
Okay.
Like, for one thing, there's the Insolvency Act,
Right.
which means creditors can come after assets,
Right.
including gifted properties,
Oh, wow.
if the person who received the gift gets into financial trouble.
So even if parents gifted property with the best intentions,
Yeah.
it could backfire later on.
Exactly. It's not as straightforward as it seems.
Right. Gifting doesn't necessarily offer the protection people think it does.
Right. It's not a foolproof solution.
It sounds like every option has its own things to think about.
Oh, yeah. There's no easy answer.
Serene, you've given us so much to consider.
Well, it's a complicated topic.
Decoupling is definitely not a decision to be made on a whim.
No, it's a big decision.
For our listeners who might have just tuned in,
Yeah.
we've been digging into decoupling in the Singapore property market,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the reasons behind it, how it works,
Right.
and most importantly, the things you really need to think about before you jump in.
Absolutely. It's not one size fits all. What works for one couple might be a disaster for another.
Right.
So you really need to know your goals, your risk tolerance,
Mhm.
and what you want for the long term.
So we've talked about the why, the how, the potential downsides,
Mm-hmm.
and we even touched on gifting as a possible alternative.
Right.
But Serene, what's the one piece of advice, the most important thing
Okay.
you would give to couples who are thinking about taking this step?
Honestly, the biggest thing is just don't rush into it.
Yeah.
Decoupling, it's not something you decide overnight,
Right.
It takes planning, research,
Hmm.
and most importantly, talk to the experts.
You're saying don't just rely on, what your friends say or what you read online.
Exactly. It's a big financial decision.
Right.
Every couple is different.
Right.
What works for one might not work for another.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to a financial advisor, a real estate lawyer.
Okay.
They can look at your situation, weigh
Yeah.
the pros and cons,
Right.
help you make the right choice for your future.
It's about having a plan that's tailored for you.
Yeah, not just following the crowd.
Don't underestimate that professional advice.
Absolutely.
Well, Serene, this has been so insightful.
Oh, thanks.
I think our listeners have really learned a lot about decoupling.
I hope so. It's a big topic these days,
Yeah.
especially with the property market here.
Right, right.
It's important for couples to be informed.
Absolutely, before they make any decisions. Before we let you go, Serene,
Yeah.
any final thoughts for our listeners?
Hmm.
Decoupling can unlock opportunities,
It can.
but it's not a magic solution.
Definitely not. It's complicated. There are benefits, but there are also risks.
Right.
So don't jump in without thinking it through.
Hmm.
Do your research, talk to the professionals,
Yeah.
and talk to each other. Make sure you're both on the same page.
Absolutely. And prepared for what it means down the road.
Exactly.
Serene, it's been a pleasure having you on Singapore Property Talk Law.
Thanks for having me.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into decoupling. We hope you found it helpful as you navigate the Singapore property market. Until next time, stay informed and make those smart choices.